Due largely to the economics education administered in schools, many people have become familiar with the concept of the law of supply and demand. This concept is heavily discussed in schools across the world and is often depicted as the lifeblood of the economy in a capitalistic monetary system. It is said to be the backbone which holds up its very structure. We are also taught that the health of the economy is dependent on consumer spending and that without it, the economy would stagnate. Without consumer spending, the whole trade system would fail. This would have disastrous effects on many areas of social life that make our lives convenient and comfortable. However, this is only partially true. Forget what you were told about economics in school. The law of supply and demand does not exist, it's a myth. Allow me to explain. When people buy products, the respective businesses and corporations experience an increase in sales and revenue. This signals to them that their products are in demand. The revenue generated from sales enables these businesses to pay their employees, who then spend that money on more goods and services provided to them by other businesses and corporations. And these establishments begin to create, or in market terms supply, more goods and services in anticipation that customers will continue to buy. It's a cyclical process. However, in truth, demand is an illusion. Think about it. Factories do not produce goods in order to keep up with real-time demand. When a person wants a car, auto manufacturers and dealerships do not assemble one specifically for that customer. The cars are already made, despite there being a demand or not. This holds true with every product on the market. Toy factories do not wait to assemble children's toys until a parent requests one, any more than cell phone companies wait for a customer to request a new cell phone to be made. Therefore, what is referred to as demand is actually a model based primarily on past sales trends that predicts future sales without anticipating any unexpected socioeconomic changes that could potentially disrupt business. If suddenly people stop buying a particular item, thousands upon thousands of products could find their way to a landfill. This is because machines in most modern facilities are automated and are only designed to create products and work continuously, yet do not account for actual demand. If demand were accurate, there would be no reason to discard perfectly good merchandise. Everything would be accounted for, unless of course the product was defective. The idea of working to eliminate waste is not really considered at all by corporations. The money that will be made from selling products is the goal, whilst waste is only minimized out of fear of wasteful spending, which could then reduce profits. Factors like the environmental impact of waste handling, product necessity, or improvements and upgrades are not considered in evaluating the consequences of waste. This is because corporations want to ensure constant revenue. This means that corporations have to find ways of persuading customers to continue to buy their products, which also increases the demand for their merchandise. This demand is artificially created in several ways. Firstly, through planned obsolescence, in other words, creating products with short lifespans. Secondly, by trying to manipulate public opinion through advertising, trying to convince humans that people who buy things are happy, beautiful, and fulfilled. Thirdly, by pulling at emotional strings or selling fear, which is commonly seen with fashion and beauty products. And finally, by anyone else pushing hard to make a buck. That is putting it as simply as I can. One of the most common ways of ensuring that customers keep spending money is through planned obsolescence. For those who are not familiar with this notion, planned obsolescence is the idea or method of purposely designing a product to wear down, break, lack compatibility with other devices, and/or become obsolete or out of fashion after a relatively short period of time. In other words, if I make a smartphone, I will design it so it breaks down after, let's say, 1 year or so, which means that you'll need to buy a new one from me every year. This way I can keep my business flowing by making and selling more smartphones. I could also make the smartphone non-upgradable, so that when a new camera comes out, you cannot replace your smartphone's camera with the new one. You will have to buy an entirely new smartphone instead.
Well, two of their most effective strategies are planned obsolescence and perceived obsolescence. Planned obsolescence is another word for designed for the dump. It means they actually make stuff to be useless as quickly as possible, so we'll chuck it and buy a new one. It's obvious with things like plastic bags and coffee cups, but now it's even big stuff. Mops, DVDs, cameras, barbecues even, everything. Even computers. Have you noticed that when you buy a computer now, the technology is changing so fast that in just a couple of years, it's actually an impediment to communication? I was curious about this, so I opened up a big desktop computer to see what was inside. And I found out that the piece that changes each year is just a tiny little piece in the corner. But you can't just change that one piece because each new version is a different shape. So you gotta chuck the whole thing and buy a new one. So I was reading industrial design journals from the 1950s when planned obsolescence was really catching on. These designers are so open about it. They actually discuss how fast can they make stuff break that still leaves the consumer having enough faith in the product to go out and buy another one. It was so intentional. But stuff cannot break fast enough to keep this arrow afloat. So there's also perceived obsolescence. Now, perceived obsolescence convinces us to throw away stuff that is still perfectly useful. How do they do that? Well, they change the way the stuff looks. So if you bought your stuff a couple of years ago, everyone can tell that you haven't contributed to this arrow recently. And since the way we demonstrate our value is contributing to this arrow, it can be embarrassing. Like, I've had the same fat white computer monitor on my desk for 5 years. My coworker just got a new computer. She has a flat, shiny, sleek monitor. It matches her computer, it matches her phone, even her pen stand. She looks like she's driving in Spaceship Central, and I look like I've got a washing machine on my desk. Fashion is another prime example of this. Have you ever wondered why women's shoe heels go from fat one year to skinny the next to fat to skinny? It's not because there's some debate about which heel structure is the most healthy for women's feet. It's because wearing fat heels in a skinny heel year shows everybody that you haven't contributed to that arrow as recently, so you're not as valuable as that person in skinny heels next to you, or more likely in some ad. It's to keep us buying new shoes. Advertisements and media in general plays a big role in this. Each of us in the US is targeted with over 3,000 advertisements a day. We see more advertisements in 1 year than people 50 years ago saw in a lifetime. And if you think about it, what's the point of an ad except to make us unhappy with what we have? So 3,000 times a day, we're told our hair is wrong, our skin is wrong, our clothes are wrong, our furniture is wrong, our car is wrong, we are wrong, but it can all be made right if we just go shopping. Media also helps by hiding all of this and all of this. So the only part of the materials economy we see is the shopping. The extraction, production, and disposal all happens outside of our field of vision.
Another type of planned obsolescence is to make a product seem out of fashion. For instance, I can advertise my new phone to look superior to the old one and make the old one look outdated, even though there's little difference between their functionalities. We are all familiar with seeing a new smartphone coming out every 6 months to a year. But is this all a part of some shady plan to keep consumers buying products? Or is it just a normal part of everyday business? Let's see. I started to think about this when I realized how slow all my new computers had become after just 1 year of use. It did not matter which operating system was installed, they just became slower and slower in a very short period of time. One time I attempted to disable my HP laptop to clean it of the dust that accumulated inside and often caused overheating. I started the job and I soon realized that I needed 2 types of screwdrivers. A minute later, that had increased to 5 different types of screwdrivers because the screws were all different types. I ended up using no fewer than 8 different screwdrivers to access the cooler. I was very surprised because there's no reason at all in my mind to have all these different screws for the same purpose. I later asked my father, who was an engineer, if these various types of screws serve different functions, and he, just as surprised as myself, said that they don't. This got me thinking about other products. I realized that old bicycles, such as the ones that my father has had since the 70s, surpass the new 21st century bicycles that I have had. Although my father's bicycles were far older than mine, they require less maintenance than my newer bikes, which need repairs every few months after their first year of use. Another example is with all the printers that I have had over the years. I never understood why it often costs more to buy new ink cartridges than to buy a new printer with ink cartridges included. I had an issue when one of the color cartridges became low on ink, but wasn't entirely empty. It would prevent me from printing with any of the other colors. That is either a very bad design or purposeful. Additionally, some printer makers add a timer to their cartridges so they expire, even if there's still plenty of ink remaining. Is it really possible that this world is so awful that it creates products that break down on purpose for mere business profit? In 1924, when the American national automobile market began reaching saturation, the head of General Motors suggested to change the design of their cars each year in order to convince people to buy a new one every year. This sounds like a conspiracy theory, but it's not. The interesting part here is that this concept was borrowed from the bicycle industry, which was already using the same tactic. This idea turned out to be very profitable for General Motors, which surpassed every other automotive company on the market at that time. Small companies could not keep up with this aggressive tactic, so they went bankrupt. Henry Ford, a major name in car manufacturing at that time, did not agree with this practice. He wanted to design simple and cost-efficient cars. Not surprisingly, General Motors surpassed Ford's sales in 1931 and became the dominant company in the industry thereafter. That same year, another group of people applying similar ideas of planned obsolescence created light bulbs that were only designed to last 1,000 hours. They had nothing to lose or fear, I suppose, since they had not had any competition at all for the previous 20 years. They were accused of holding back technological developments that could increase the lifespan of the light bulb. What is amazing is that their association levied fines on their own members' bulbs found to surpass the 1,000-hour mark. So if you tried to make a better light bulb, you were made to pay a fine. The people behind this plan claimed that it was to optimize most bulbs and that a longer lifetime could be obtained only at the expense of efficiency, since progressively more heat and less light is obtained as the lifespan is increased, resulting in wasted electricity. Of course, some argued to the contrary. Maybe they really did need to limit bulb lifespans in order to optimize their efficiency. How should we know? The main point here is to show that it is possible to intentionally design things to last only a certain amount of time before they break down. In 1932, as a response to the first major financial depression, a type of crisis where people's invented game, the money game, didn't work as planned, some proposed a plan that would have the government impose illegal obsolescence on consumer goods to stimulate and perpetuate consumption. Brooks Stevens, a major force in industrial design, as the New York Times describes him, later popularized this idea even more. By his definition, planned obsolescence is instilling in the buyer the desire to own something a little newer, a little better. As Wikipedia states, A common method of deliberately limiting a product's useful life is to use inferior materials in critical areas. For instance, screws can be made with a soft metal that easily wears down, products that use batteries that cannot be easily replaced, or requiring batteries that are custom made and can only be replaced by a specific company, usually the original manufacturer. Planned obsolescence is sometimes achieved by placing a heat-sensitive component adjacent to a component that is expected to get hot. A common example is LCD screens with heat-sensitive electrolytic capacitors placed next to power components that may warm up to 100 degrees Celsius or hotter. This heat generally reduces the lifespan of the electrolytic capacitor. Often the goal of these designs is to make the cost of repairs comparable to the replacement cost, or to prevent any form of servicing of the product at all. In 2012, Toshiba was criticized for using cease and desist letters to the owner of a website that hosted its copyright repair manuals, thereby adding to the detriment of the independent and home repair market. Did you know that Intel works on the production of the next generation of PC chips before it has even begun to market the last one it created? It is like they somehow know that people will buy the next one too. If you want to change your iPhone's battery, you need a special screwdriver because the battery is encased into the phone. More than that, it will cost you around $79, just $20 short of the typical subsidized price for a new iPhone 5C. Another thing that iPhone users complain about is that upgrading to a newer operating system on older iPhones makes them slower, and it is extremely difficult to revert back to the older, better functioning software. That is, it is better to buy the new iPhone if you want to upgrade. Of course, we cannot say for sure whether or not Apple is really engaging in planned obsolescence, but their product designs and actions arouse suspicion when you know they can be made better. When a person purchases a computer, the buyer expects their investment to last for a few years. At least this was the case over the last decade or so. But recently, computer companies have stepped up their quotas and sales. These days, computers need to be replaced at a far more rapid rate than in past years. We are told that this is because the speed of innovation or technology is increasing so rapidly. But again, this is only partially true. Many programmers purposely make computer software which can only be run on certain operating systems. Therefore, the consumer has no choice but to go out to the store and buy a brand new computer, despite the fact that their old computer works just fine. Computers are expensive, and the annoyance of planned obsolescence turns out to be quite a financial disaster when a person wishes to upgrade their computer, but ends up having to purchase a brand new one. If you have any experience with computers at all, you're likely familiar with software updates. Recently, I had to purchase a new Apple MacBook Pro. I previously had the original MacBook, but in wishing to incorporate new programs into my old computer, such as drag and dictate, I was hit with the realization that my computer was far too outdated to support it. Over the 5 years since I had purchased it, the Apple operating system had gone through Snow Leopard and Tiger versions, and had recently introduced Lion. The programs I required were only available to the new Lion operating system. However, because the operating system on my old laptop was non-upgradable, I had no choice but to purchase a whole new computer, even though there was absolutely nothing wrong with my old MacBook to begin with. It still runs fine to this day. So the question is, why did Apple computers need to upgrade through multiple operating systems? Why not simply continue to upgrade one version and eliminate the need for all the excess waste resulting from outdated software, hardware, and even entire computers? The answer is again simple. Apple computers need to constantly generate revenue to outdo their competitors. This is a very smart business plan for corporations, but it is also extremely wasteful and unnecessarily complex. and is something that we can move past now due to what could be achieved with our present level of technology. Of course, it is sometimes hard, if not impossible, to tell when a company deliberately does something like this for profit. I showed you some companies that are highly suspected of using planned obsolescence, but don't admit it, but some other companies may be more open about the topic. Whatever the case may be, there's no doubt that this strategy can be very profitable for business, and even harmful if not adopted, as one Canadian company learned firsthand. The company built an armed vehicle for the Canadian Army 14 years ago, and they did a pretty good job. So good, in fact, that when they unveiled a more recent and improved model to the military, with the hopes of selling the new vehicles for a $2.1 billion contract, the Canadian Army said they don't need them because the old ones are still quite good. That company lost $2.1 billion because its products were too well made. So it's important to understand that, in today's trade system, a business can go bankrupt if they produce great products that do not need maintenance or replacement for many years. The thing is, this idea of planned obsolescence cannot be properly defined because you cannot know the actual intent of companies. They can adopt this strategy while at the same time not admitting it. How can you say to Apple that they are using this tactic when they use special screws for their cases, yet are able to say that it is simply their design choice and nothing more than that? Planned obsolescence is just a marketing strategy that some, perhaps many, adopt. When I look around, I see lots of cars and many new ones for sale, and I wonder what is so new about these cars. The same thing goes for computers, smartphones, and many other products. Most people use their smartphones for simply internet services like Facebook, email, and some other basic functions, not for resource-hungry games or apps, yet many usually buy the latest models. Why are they replacing perfectly good smartphones every time a new one is released? I used to have the coolest phones in town. When the new and cool Nokia N-Gage came out, I was the first one to have it. Until 2007 or so, I was obsessed with mobile phones until I realized that they are basically all the same. After that, I stopped upgrading my phone every time a new one came out. The reason I had bought so many was because of the social context, mostly advertising.
First of all, if you go to a drugstore, you see all this advertisement, anti-aging this, take 10 years off your face, 10 years that. How can the FDA allow all these fraudulent claims to being made? So I actually interviewed an FDA official. He said, the Food and Drug Administration can only monitor things that penetrate the skin, medicines that penetrate the skin. Anything that does not penetrate the skin, they cannot monitor. But then, if it doesn't penetrate the skin, it doesn't work. So in other words, you can only lie through your teeth as long as it doesn't work. Let me repeat that again. According to federal law, you can make any statement you want about take life, take 10 years off your face, whatever, anything you want, as long as it doesn't penetrate the skin, as long as it doesn't work.
Think about fashion. Clothes are basically all the same. No new features added to any new clothes. They are purely aesthetic things, yet people constantly change clothes because of subjective, fashion-driven motives. If you produce laptops and make their power plugs different every 5 years or so, but maintain the same voltage and functionality, then your actions are inhumane because someone who has an older laptop may not be able to find a replacement power cable, rendering such old models completely unusable. What is even more scary is the huge waste of resources. Changing fashion and gadgets because they're not cool anymore or purposely designed to fail produces so much waste. All in all, it is true that we live in a world run by primitive monkeys, for their own personal profit, who use many psychological strategies to make you buy their products. It's too ugly, you need a more beautiful one, it's not fashionable, it's not that good, and so on. But all of this is the fault of the game the monkeys play in the concrete jungle, the trade game, which rewards you for such actions and even punishes you when you don't follow them. Think about it. There's so many products in the world, like cars in showrooms, smartphones, tablets, and PCs in stores, batteries, furniture, and so on. Companies have to find ways to sell these products or else they will not make a profit or even go bankrupt. Of course, they will all try to make you buy them using various tactics. This trade system could not work if suddenly products were made so well that people won't buy new ones for years. That's the sad truth, and this is why the game that we play is now no longer sustainable.